The combat simulator threw David Rivers across the training ground like a broken toy. His mech crashed into the concrete barrier with a sound that made everyone in the observation deck wince. Sparks flew from the damaged joints as the machine tried to stand up, failed, then collapsed again with a final wheeze of dying hydraulics. Above him, 20 other cadets danced through the air in perfect formation. Their mechs moved like deadly ballet dancers, each step calculated and smooth. Energy weapons fired in precise bursts, hitting targets that David couldn't even see from his position on the ground. The contrast was painful to watch. "Rivers, what are you doing down there?" Colonel Hayes barked through the comm system. His voice carried the kind of disgust that only came from watching the same failure happen over and over again. "This is basic movement drill. My grandmother could pilot, better than you, and she's been dead for 30 years. David tried to make his mech stand again. The neural interface felt like wearing shoes that were 3 sizes too small. Every command he sent to the machine came out wrong, twisted into something clumsy and slow. Where other pilots thought and their mechs responded instantly, David had to fight for every simple movement. "Sorry, sir," he muttered into his helmet microphone. The words tasted bitter. He had been saying them so often lately that they felt like his name. Around the training field, other cadets finished their exercises with smooth landings. Their mechs powered down in perfect synchronization, like a choreographed show. David was still struggling to make his machine take 3 steps without falling over. Tom Bradley, the top cadet in their class, jumped down from his mech with the easy confidence of someone who had never failed at anything. His synchronization scores were off the charts. Military recruiters had been trying to sign him since he was 16. He walked over to where David was finally getting his mech to stand upright. "Rough day, David?" Tom asked. But there wasn't any real sympathy in his voice. It was the kind of question people asked when they wanted to seem nice but didn't actually care about the answer. "Just having some trouble with the balance systems," David replied, trying to sound like it wasn't a big deal. But they both knew it was. Balance was the most basic skill in mech piloting. Children learned it in their first lesson. Colonel Hayes appeared at the foot of David's mech, looking up at the cockpit with the expression of someone who had stepped in something unpleasant. He was a thin man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been training pilots for 20 years, and he had never seen anyone as hopeless as David Rivers. "Rivers, climb down here. We need to talk." David's heart sank. These conversations never went well. He powered down his systems and climbed out of the cockpit, his legs shaking slightly from the neural feedback. Other cadets were gathering around to watch, sensing that something important was about to happen. "Son," Colonel Hayes began, and David knew immediately that this was going to be worse than usual. The colonel only called people son when he was about to destroy their dreams. "I've been watching you for 6 months now. I've seen you practice every day, sometimes until midnight. I know you work harder than anyone else in this class." David waited for the but that he knew was coming. But effort isn't enough in this business. Neural compatibility isn't something you can learn or practice your way into. You either have it or you don't. And son, you don't have it. The words hit David like a physical blow. He had known this was coming for weeks, but hearing it out loud still felt like having his chest carved open. Around him, other cadets shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched with the kind of fascination people had for accidents. "Your synchronization scores are the lowest I've ever recorded," the colonel continued. "In 20 years of training pilots, I have never seen numbers this bad. You're not just below average, Rivers. You're in a category all by yourself." David stared at the ground. He could feel his face burning with embarrassment. "What does that mean for my assignment, sir?" "It means you won't be getting one. At least, not the kind you want." Colonel Hayes pulled out a data pad and scrolled through some files. "I'm recommending you for maintenance duty, support staff. You'll keep the real pilots' machines running." The watching cadets began to whisper among themselves. David caught fragments of their conversations. Words like washout and failure floated over to him like smoke. He wanted to disappear, to sink through the concrete and never come back up. "Sir, isn't there anything else I could try?" David asked, hating how desperate he sounded. "Maybe a different type of mech or—" "Son, I've put you in every machine we have. Basic trainers, heavy assault units, scout mechs, support platforms. The result is always the same. Your brain just doesn't work the way these machines need it to work. There's no shame in that. Some people are meant to be pilots, and some people are meant to do other things." But there was shame in it, David thought. In a society where your worth was measured by how well you could bond with machines, being unable to do it was worse than being sick or injured. It was like being broken at the most basic level. The colonel looked at his data pad again. "Actually, there might be one assignment available, but it's not what you'd call glamorous." David looked up hopefully. "There's a derelict alien ship that needs investigating. Big thing, been floating in the asteroid fields for who knows how long. The science teams want someone to do basic reconnaissance. Walk around with a scanner, take pictures, that sort of thing. It's boring work, and potentially dangerous. The kind of job we usually give to people who—" He trailed off. "People who are expendable," David finished. "I wouldn't put it quite like that." But they both knew that was exactly what he meant. David was the bottom of the barrel, the cadet who couldn't do anything right. If something happened, to him on a routine scouting mission, it wouldn't be a significant loss. Not like losing someone with real talent. "I'll take it," David said quietly. Colonel Hayes nodded, already moving on to other business. "Report to Dr. Morgan Reeves tomorrow at 800. She'll brief you on the mission details." As the colonel walked away, the other cadets began to disperse. The excitement was over. David Rivers had officially washed out, confirming what everyone already knew. He was the weakest link in a chain that had no room for weakness. David stood alone next to his broken-down mech, feeling smaller than he ever had before. Tomorrow he would begin his new career as a glorified janitor in space. It wasn't what he had dreamed of, but it was all he had left. He looked up at the sky where real pilots flew real missions that actually mattered. Somewhere out there was an alien derelict waiting for him to explore it. It wasn't much, but maybe it was better than nothing. Maybe. Space felt different when you were traveling to your first real assignment, even if that assignment was basically janitorial work. David pressed his face against the small porthole of the transport ship and watched the stars slide by. 3 days of hyperspace travel had brought them to the outer rim, where ancient things drifted in the dark between worlds. Dr. Morgan Reeves sat across from him, reading from a thick tablet full of research notes. She was younger than David had expected, maybe 35, with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to see everything. She had been studying the derelict for 8 months without being able to get inside. "Tell me again why you think I can help with this thing," David said, trying not to sound as nervous as he felt. "I mean, if your whole team of scientists can't figure it out, what's a washout pilot going to do?" Dr. Reeves looked up from her tablet and studied him for a moment. "You're not here to figure anything out. You're here to be our canary in the coal mine. That's encouraging. The ship has been completely sealed since we found it. No doors, no hatches, no openings of any kind. The hull material doesn't respond to any of our tools. We can't cut it, melt it, or blast through it. It's like the whole thing is one solid piece of metal. So how am I supposed to get inside? You're not. Nobody is. That's the problem." She turned her tablet around to show him a 3-dimensional image of the alien vessel. David whistled softly. The thing was enormous, easily 5 kilometers from nose to tail. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow when you looked at them directly. "We think it might be some kind of automated system," Dr. Reeves continued. "Maybe it's waiting for the right signal or the right type of person to approach it. We've tried everything we can think of. Different radio frequencies, mathematical sequences, even music. Nothing works. And you think I might be different somehow? Honestly? Probably not. But we've run out of other options. The military wants results, and they're not particularly picky about how we get them. If walking around the hull with a scanner and taking pictures helps us learn something new, then that's what we'll do. The research ship Horizon came out of hyperspace with the gentle lurch that always made David's stomach feel strange. Through the porthole, he could see their destination waiting for them in the distance. The alien derelict hung motionless against the stars, dark except for the faint reflection of distant suns on its metallic surface. "My God," David whispered. Even from several kilometers away, the ship was impressive. It had an organic quality to it, like it had been grown rather than built. Smooth curves flowed into geometric angles in ways that hurt to look at for too long. 20 minutes later, David found himself suiting up in the Horizon's equipment bay. The environmental suit felt clunky compared to a mech's neural interface, but at least it responded to his commands without fighting him. Dr. Reeves checked his scanner and camera equipment while other team members prepared their shuttle. "Remember, you're just taking pictures and readings," she told him for the third time. "Don't try to force anything. Don't push buttons or pull levers. Just walk around and document what you see." "Got it. Look but don't touch." The shuttle ride. Over to the derelict was quiet. David sat with two other researchers, Dr. Park and Dr. Wilson, who seemed much more excited about this than he was. They had been trying to crack this mystery for months. For them, it was the discovery of a lifetime. For David, it was just another reminder that he wasn't good enough for real military service. As they approached the alien ship, its size became overwhelming. The shuttle was a tiny speck next to the massive hull. David had thought the images on Dr. Reeves's tablet were impressive, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. The patterns on the surface seemed to pulse and shift with a life of their own. "Look at those geometric designs," Dr. Park said, pressing his face against the shuttle window. "They're unlike anything in our database. The mathematical precision is incredible. And they're definitely moving," Dr. Wilson added. "Very slowly, but there's definitely some kind of activity in the hull material." The shuttle pilot, an older woman named Captain Torres, guided them along the length of the derelict, looking for a good place to dock. "Everything looks the same to me," she muttered. "Solid metal as far as the eye can see." They were about halfway, down the ship's length, when something unexpected happened. David had been watching the hull patterns absently, not really thinking about anything in particular, when a section directly in front of their shuttle began to glow. "What the hell?" Captain Torres said, pulling back on the controls. The glow spread outward from a central point, following the geometric lines carved into the hull. As they watched in amazement, panels that had been solid metal moments before began to slide apart, revealing a docking bay that perfectly matched the size and shape of their shuttle. "How is that possible?" Dr. Park whispered. Dr. Reeves was frantically taking readings on her instruments. "The metal is restructuring itself at the molecular level. It's like the ship is building a docking port specifically for us." "Should we go in?" Captain Torres asked. "Yes," Dr. Reeves said without hesitation. "This is exactly the kind of response we've been hoping for." The shuttle glided into the newly formed docking bay. As soon as they were inside, the opening sealed behind them with the same flowing motion. Lights came on automatically, bathing everything in a soft blue glow. The bay was clearly designed for vessels like theirs, with obvious connection points, for air and power. "Atmosphere is breathable," Dr. Wilson reported, checking his instruments. "Gravity is set to Earth normal. Temperature is comfortable. It's like the ship is trying to make us feel welcome." They spent 10 minutes running safety checks before opening the shuttle's hatch. David was the first one out, since this was technically his mission. The moment his boots touched the alien deck, he felt something strange. It wasn't quite a vibration, more like a very faint humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Do you hear that?" he asked. The others paused and listened. Hear what? Dr. Reeves said. David frowned. Maybe it was just his imagination. The stress of being in such an alien place was probably making him hear things. The interior of the ship was even more impressive than the outside. Corridors stretched away in multiple directions, their walls covered in the same flowing patterns. They had seen on the hull. Crystalline conduits ran along the ceiling, pulsing with faint energy. The architecture was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Stick together, Dr. Reeves ordered. We don't know what kind of security systems this thing might have. They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing strangely in the vast spaces. David took pictures and scanner readings of everything they passed, but his attention kept being drawn forward toward the ship's center. Something was calling to him, though he couldn't explain what it was or how he knew. After an hour of walking, they reached what could only be the ship's heart. The corridor opened into a massive chamber with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. And there, in the center of the room, stood something that made them all stop and stare. It was clearly a war machine, but unlike anything in human design. 30 meters tall and elegantly proportioned, it combined organic curves with geometric precision in a way that suggested both beauty and deadly purpose. Its surface was covered in the same patterns they had seen throughout the ship, but here, they moved more quickly like blood flowing through veins. Incredible, Dr. Park breathed. It's like a work of art. Ancient text began scrolling across nearby surfaces, writing itself in languages that had been dead for millions of years. The war machine stood motionless, but David could feel its presence, like a weight in his mind. Dr. Reeves was taking readings as fast as her instruments could process them. The energy signatures are off the charts. This thing is definitely powered up and ready to go, but it's not responding to our presence at all. David took a step closer to the machine. The humming he had been hearing grew louder. Careful, Dr. Wilson warned. We don't know what it's capable of. But David couldn't stop himself from moving forward. Something about the machine felt familiar, like seeing a face you recognized, but couldn't quite place. He reached out toward A. Its surface, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. The moment his gloved hand touched the metal, everything changed. Light exploded through the chamber like liquid fire. The ancient war machine that had stood silent for countless ages suddenly blazed with energy, its surface patterns flowing like rivers of molten gold. A harmonic resonance filled the air, so deep and powerful that David could feel it in his bones. "Get back!" Dr. Reeves shouted, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. David couldn't move. His hand was still pressed against the machine's hull, and something was flowing between them. Not electricity, not heat, but something else entirely. Something alive. The massive form began to shift and reconfigure itself. Sections of armor plating slid apart to reveal systems within systems, all glowing with the same golden light. What had seemed like solid metal was actually incredibly complex technology, layer upon layer of mechanisms that worked together in ways human science couldn't begin to understand. Dr. Park and Dr. Wilson were backing away toward the chamber entrance, their instruments screaming warnings about energy levels that shouldn't be possible. But Dr. Reeves stood her ground, frantically recording everything with her scanner. "David, can you hear me?" she called out. He could hear her, but it was like listening to someone speak underwater. All of his attention was focused on the connection, flowing between himself and the machine. Images were flooding his mind. Not pictures exactly, but understanding. Knowledge being transferred directly from one consciousness to another. The machine had a name, though it wasn't a word in any language. David knew. The closest translation would be Aegis, shield, protector, guardian. It had been waiting here for so long that entire civilizations had risen and fallen in the time it took for dust to settle on its hull, waiting for someone with the right kind of mind to wake it up. The neural interface opened like a flower blooming in fast motion. Where human mech cockpits were cramped and mechanical, this was something entirely different. The pilot chamber looked more like a work of art than military equipment, all flowing curves and organic shapes. It was clearly designed for something, roughly human-sized, but it was beautiful in a way that human engineering never achieved. "Oh no," Dr. Reeves whispered. "David, don't even think about it. We don't know what that thing will do to you." But David was already climbing toward the interface. He couldn't have stopped himself if he wanted to. The machine was calling to him, and every instinct he had was telling him to answer. This was what he had been meant for. Not the clumsy human mechs that fought against his commands, but this perfect fusion of technology and consciousness. He settled into the pilot chamber, and the interface closed around him like a gentle embrace. Instead of the harsh neural feedback he was used to from human systems, this felt like slipping into warm water. Natural, comfortable, right. The connection established itself slowly, carefully, like two minds learning to dance together. David felt Aegis exploring the edges of his consciousness, testing, measuring, understanding. It was the strangest sensation he had ever experienced, being known so completely by something else. And then the memories began. They weren't his memories. They belonged to Aegis and to the beings who had created it millions of years ago. The architects, a race that had transcended physical form long before humans learned to make fire. But before they departed this plane of existence, they had left guardians behind. David saw the reason why. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient things were stirring. The devourers, entities that consumed not just worlds, but life itself. Entire civilizations devoured, their essence converted into raw power for creatures that existed beyond normal space and time. The architects had faced them once before and barely survived. They had built the Guardians as an insurance policy, scattering them throughout the galaxy to wait for the day when the Devourers returned. Each Guardian was designed to bond with a specific type of consciousness, one capable of thinking in ways the enemy couldn't predict. Most species were too rigid in their thinking patterns. They approached problems logically, systematically, predictably. The Devourers had learned to counter such minds eons ago, but some beings thought differently. They found solutions in chaos, strength in apparent weakness, victory in approaches. That made no logical sense. Humans had such minds, and David's mind was particularly suited to the task. "Your neural patterns are highly irregular," Aegis communicated, "though not in words. Your species' military systems cannot accommodate your thought processes. They are designed for conformity. I am designed for uniqueness." "So that's why I'm such a failure as a pilot," David realized. "You are not a failure. You are simply paired with the wrong technology." Through the interface, David could feel Aegis testing its systems, weapons that could reshape reality itself, shields that existed partially outside normal space, engines that drew power from dimensions humans didn't even have names for. All of it perfectly maintained, ready for war. "The enemy approaches," Aegis continued. "My long sleep is ending. Your people will face extinction unless Guardians awaken to protect them. How long do we have?" Images flashed through David's mind. Ships like living nightmares dropping out of hyperspace near human colonies. The first attacks would begin within days. Outside the interface, Dr. Reeves was still trying to get his attention. "David, your life signs are going crazy. You need to disconnect from that thing right now." But David couldn't disconnect. He was beginning to understand what Aegis truly was and why it had chosen him. The bond between Guardian and pilot wasn't just temporary. It was permanent, complete, life-changing. Once established, it could never be broken. "Will it hurt?" David asked. "Transformation is rarely without discomfort," Aegis replied. "But you will become something greater than you were. Your species' future depends upon it. David thought about his failure at the military academy, his last place ranking, the humiliation and shame he had carried for months. None of that mattered now. He had found his purpose, even if it wasn't what he had expected. "Do it," he said. The bonding process began in earnest. David felt his consciousness expanding, merging with systems he couldn't begin to understand. His awareness spread throughout the ancient ship, into sensors that could perceive across multiple dimensions and weapons that operated on principles human physics hadn't discovered yet. But more than that, he could feel Aegis itself. Not as a machine, but as a living entity with its own personality. It was ancient beyond human comprehension, patient and wise and utterly dedicated to its purpose. It had been alone for so long that the prospect of partnership filled it with something that might have been joy. "We are bonded," Aegis announced, and David felt the truth of it in every cell of his body. "You are my pilot. I am your guardian. Together, we will face what comes." The interface opened and David climbed out. But he wasn't the same person who had climbed in. The connection to Aegis remained, like a constant presence in the back of his mind. He could feel the machine's readiness, its eagerness to finally fulfill the purpose it had waited so long to serve. Dr. Reeves rushed over to him, her scanner beeping frantically. "David, your neural patterns have completely changed. Whatever that thing did to you, it's altered your brain structure at the fundamental level." "I'm fine," David said, and he meant it. For the first time in his life, he felt truly fine. Complete. Like all the broken pieces of himself had finally been put together the right way. "We need to get you back to the horizon immediately," Dr. Reeves insisted. "You need medical attention." "No," David said firmly. "I need to contact the military. The outer colonies are about to come under attack. We have maybe days to prepare." Dr. Reeves stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" David looked back at Aegis, which stood motionless again, but was now unmistakably alive, waiting for his command. "Because my partner told me, and it's been waiting a very long time to protect humanity." The ancient war machine pulsed once with golden light, as if acknowledging his words. The first Guardian had awakened. The real war was about to begin. The emergency alert came through just as David and the research team were preparing to return to New Avalon. Dr. Reeves was in the middle of arguing with military headquarters about David's condition when her communications console erupted with priority signals from across the outer rim. "Colony 7 has gone dark," Captain Torres reported, her face pale as she read the incoming messages. "No response to any communications for the past 6 hours." More alerts followed in rapid succession. Colony 12 reported strange ships appearing in their system before the transmission cut to static. The mining station at Kepler was sending fragmentary distress calls about creatures that weren't quite alive and weren't quite machine. Dr. Reeves looked at David with new understanding. "You said this was going to happen." "Aegis warned me," David replied, feeling the ancient machine's presence constant in his mind. "The Devourers have returned. They've been waiting in dark space for the galaxy to recover from the last harvest." "The last harvest?" Dr. Park asked. Images flowed through David's consciousness, shared memories from ages spanning millions of years. "They come every few million years. They consume everything, then retreat to wait for new civilizations to evolve. We're just the latest crop." The horizon changed course immediately, racing back toward human space at maximum speed. But even traveling faster than light, they were still 3 days away from New Avalon. 3 days while the outer colonies fell one by one to an enemy that human weapons couldn't even scratch. David spent those 3 days in the cargo bay with Aegis, learning to interface with systems that operated on principles beyond human understanding. The war machine had been transferred to the research ship using a specialized transport drone, and now it stood in the center of their largest storage compartment like a metallic god waiting for battle. Every time David connected with the interface, he understood more about what they were facing. The Devourers weren't just aliens with advanced technology. They were something far worse. Entities that existed partially outside normal reality, feeding on the life force of entire worlds. They had destroyed civilizations that were millions of years older than humanity. Your people's weapons fire energy and projectiles, Aegis explained during one of their sessions. The enemy has learned to absorb such attacks and convert them to power. Conventional warfare is useless against them. Then, how do we fight them? With weapons that operate outside conventional physics. Reality manipulation, dimensional folding, temporal distortion. The architects developed these technologies specifically to counter the Devourer's abilities. When the horizon finally reached New Avalon, they found the human military in complete panic. The outer colonies had fallen with terrifying speed, entire planets stripped of all life in a matter of hours. The few survivors who managed to escape brought reports of horrors that challenged sanity. Colonel Hayes was in the command center when David arrived, looking older than his years. The confidence that had defined him during training exercises was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who had seen his entire world view collapse. "Rivers," he said when he spotted David. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be on maintenance duty." "Sir, I need to speak with you about the alien attacks. I have information that might help." Hayes laughed bitterly. "Information? Son, we've thrown everything we have at these things. Our best pilots, our newest mechs, our heaviest weapons. Nothing even slows them down. What could a washout possibly tell us that we don't already know?" David took a deep breath. This was going to be the hard part. "Sir, I've bonded with an ancient alien war machine. It was designed specifically to fight these creatures. With your permission, I'd like to take it into combat." The command center fell silent. Every officer in the room turned to stare at David. Colonel Hayes's expression shifted from tired frustration to something approaching anger. "Son, are you having some kind of breakdown? Because if you are, this is not the time or place for it." "I'm completely serious, sir. The machine is called Aegis. It's been waiting for millions of years for the Devourers to return. I'm its chosen pilot." "Chosen pilot," Hayes repeated slowly. "David, you can barely pilot a training mech without falling over. You expect me to believe that some ancient alien weapon picked you as its operator?" Before David could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The main display screen lit up with tactical information as sensors detected massive shapes dropping out of hyperspace near the edge of the system. "Contact!" the sensor operator called out. "Multiple large vessels, configuration unknown. They're heading directly for New Avalon." Through the viewports, they could see the approaching fleet. The ships were unlike anything in human experience, organic curves mixed with geometric brutality. They moved through space like living things, pulsing with dark energy. Just looking at them made David's skin crawl. "All available units, launch immediately," Hayes ordered. "Form up on Battle Formation 7. Engage the enemy at maximum range." David watched as the pride of the human military launched into space. Sleek fighters and heavily armed mechs, piloted by the best the species had to offer. For a moment, he felt a pang of envy. These were the pilots who had succeeded where he had failed, the ones who had earned their place in the cockpits of humanity's finest war machines. The battle was over in minutes. Human weapons struck the Devourer ships and simply disappeared, absorbed into the alien hulls like water soaking into sand. The enemy vessels responded with weapons that seemed to reach through dimensions, striking targets that should have been protected by shields and armor. One by one, the human craft vanished in bursts of sickly light. "Fall back!" Hayes commanded, but there was nowhere to retreat to. The alien ships were already moving toward New Avalon, their intent clear. David felt Aegis stirring in his mind, eager for battle. The ancient machine had been forced to watch as younger races fell to the devourers for eons. Now, finally, it had a chance to fight back. "Colonel," David said quietly, "let me try." Hayes turned on him with fury in his eyes. "Try what? You want to take your imaginary alien friend out there and save us all? Son, I've got real pilots dying out there. I don't have time for your delusions." But Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her scanner still in her hand. "Colonel, I've been monitoring David's neural patterns since he bonded with the machine. The changes are real. Whatever happened to him on that ship, it wasn't psychological. His brain has been physically altered at the cellular level. That doesn't mean he can fight those things. It means we should let him try," she insisted. "Because right now, he's the only option we have left." The enemy ships were getting closer. On the tactical display, David could see them beginning to extend tendrils toward New Avalon's surface. The harvest was about to begin. Colonel Hayes looked at David for a long moment, weighing the impossible against the hopeless. Finally, he nodded. "Transport Bay 7, get that thing of yours ready for launch. But Rivers," he paused, "if this is some kind of breakdown, if you get yourself killed out there for nothing, I will never forgive myself for letting you go." David nodded and headed for the transport bay, feeling Aegis's anticipation building in his mind. The ancient guardian had waited so long for this moment. Now, finally, it was time to fulfill the purpose for which it had been created. The real test was about to begin. The launch bay doors opened to reveal a view that would haunt human nightmares for generations. The Devourer fleet hung in space like a cancer against the stars, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent life. Tendrils of dark energy were already reaching down toward New Avalon's surface, beginning the harvest that would strip every living thing from the planet. David guided Aegis out of the transport bay, feeling the ancient machine's systems come fully online for the first time in millions of years. Through their neural link, he could sense the Guardian's mixture of anticipation and sorrow. How many worlds had fallen while it slept? How many civilizations had been consumed while the Guardians waited for pilots who never came? "Not this time," David whispered, and felt Aegis echo his determination. The Devourer ships immediately detected their approach. Weapons that had effortlessly destroyed human forces turned toward this new threat, unleashing torrents of energy that bent space itself. But Aegis didn't dodge the attacks in any conventional sense. Instead, it simply stepped sideways through dimensions, allowing the deadly beams to pass through empty space where it had been moments before. "Fascinating," Aegis communicated as they closed the distance. "They have learned new techniques since our last encounter, but the fundamental principles remain the same." David felt the war machine's weapons systems activating. These weren't the crude projectile and energy weapons that humans used. Aegis fought with reality itself as its arsenal. Space folded around them as the Guardian fired its first shot, a beam of pure force that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The leading Devourer ship simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not exploded, but deleted from reality as if it had never been there at all. The enemy fleet reacted with what might have been surprise, their formation shifting to bring more weapons to bear on this unexpected threat. But David and Aegis were already moving, dancing through space with a grace that human pilots could never achieve. Where David had always been clumsy in human mechs, fighting against systems that couldn't understand his thoughts, with Aegis he was poetry in motion. Another Devourer ship fell to weapons that rewrote the laws of physics around their target. Then another. But the enemy was learning, adapting their defenses even as the battle raged. Tentacles of living darkness reached out from the remaining ships, trying to entangle Aegis in nets of anti-reality. "They adapt quickly," Aegis warned. "We must press the attack before they develop effective countermeasures." David pushed their connection deeper, merging his consciousness more completely with the ancient Guardian. The sensation was overwhelming. like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup, but also exhilarating. Through Aegis, he could perceive the battle across multiple dimensions, seeing attacks coming from directions that didn't exist in normal space. A devourer weapon struck them directly, a lance of entropy that should have aged Aegis to dust in seconds. But the Guardian's temporal shields held, creating pockets of accelerated time that allowed the attack to spend itself harmlessly against barriers of crystallized moments. "How are we supposed to win this?" David asked as more enemy ships closed in around them. "There are dozens of them, and they're adapting to everything we do." "Victory was never the purpose," Aegis replied calmly. "We are guardians, not conquerors. Our role is to protect the young races until they can protect themselves." As if responding to those words, David felt something new stirring in his consciousness. Other presences, distant but growing stronger. Throughout human space, ancient machines were awakening. The neural pattern that had allowed David to bond with Aegis was apparently not as unique as they had thought. On a dozen worlds, humans who had been considered failures were suddenly finding themselves connected to guardians that had waited eons for the right pilots. The washouts, the rejects, the ones who couldn't synchronize with conventional technology were discovering that they had been designed for something far greater. "There are others," David realized. "Many others. Your species possesses the neural flexibility required to pilot our machines. We have been waiting for you to mature enough to find us." Through the Guardian network, David could feel them awakening. Tim Rogers, a failed pilot from the Rim colonies, suddenly finding himself bonded with a Guardian that specialized in defensive warfare. Sarah Chen, who had washed out of mech training 3 years ago, now piloting a Guardian designed for deep space combat. Dozens of others, all the rejects and failures that human society had discarded, finally finding their true purpose. The Devourer fleet found itself facing not just one Guardian, but an entire network of ancient war machines piloted by humans whose minds operated outside conventional patterns. The enemy's advantage in adaptation became meaningless when facing pilots who thought in chaos, who found solutions in approaches that made no logical sense. David felt the tide of battle turning. Where human weapons had been useless against the Devourers, the Guardians fought with tools specifically designed to counter every advantage the enemy possessed. Reality-warping weapons met shields that existed in folded space. Entropy beams struck temporal barriers that redirected their effects back through time. But victory came at a cost. David could feel the strain of the deep neural link burning through his nervous system. The human brain wasn't designed to handle the kind of information flow required to pilot a Guardian at full capacity. Each moment of perfect synchronization consumed a little more of his humanity. "The price of bonding," Aegis explained gently. "To pilot a Guardian is to be forever changed. You cannot return to what you were." David felt the truth of those words. His neural patterns were shifting, evolving, becoming something that was neither fully human nor fully artificial. But as he watched the last Devourer ship dissolve into component atoms, he found that he didn't mind. The immediate threat was over, but David knew this was just the beginning. Throughout the galaxy, ancient evils stirred in the dark spaces between stars. There would be other battles, other threats to face. Humanity would need its guardians more than ever. As Aegis turned toward New Avalon, David could see the planet's surface through sensors that operated across multiple spectrums. The harvest tendrils were already withering, their connection to the Devourer fleet severed. The world would live to see another day. In the command center below, Colonel Hayes was probably trying to understand what had just happened. How his worst cadet had somehow become humanity's greatest defender. David almost smiled at the thought. The colonel's carefully ordered world of rankings and evaluations had just been turned upside down. The failures had become the heroes. Rejects had become the guardians. And David Rivers, who had ranked last in every test that mattered, was now piloted by a machine that had been waiting millions of years just for him. "What happens now?" David asked. "Now we prepare," Aegis replied. "This was only a scouting force. The true Devourer fleet lies in dark space, gathering strength for the final harvest. Your species has perhaps a year before they return in numbers too great for even the Guardians to face. Then we'll need more pilots. Yes, every human who has ever failed to synchronize with your technology is a potential Guardian pilot. They must be found and trained. The neural patterns that made them failures in your society make them perfect for our purposes." David nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just a pilot, but a teacher, a leader in a war that would determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. As they approached New Avalon's docking bays, David could see crowds gathering to witness the return of their unlikely savior. There would be questions, debriefings, probably medals and ceremonies. But all of that felt distant and unimportant. What mattered was that humanity now had guardians again. The ancient machines had awakened, and their pilots were ready for whatever darkness lay ahead. David Rivers, once the worst pilot in human space, had become something far greater than he had ever imagined. And this was only the beginning of his story.